stuff?
Well, we weren't able to get the camera or the mic to
Be recognized?
Be recognized.
Conference phone driver.
Like I just
She has to let you in.
No, I guess what I'm saying is.
Let's see, I will unmute just to,
Check.
Yay.
Okay.
I think we're there.
That worked out. Let's check the. How do I hear my?
Because you're.
Oh, I like it. It's muted, but not my.
Now you should leave, right? It's working, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna break it again. It was fine when I left.
That's
What
right.
do you guys do to it?
That's
Muted.
So I'm muted, Heather's muted.
Because I can't get rid of that from here. So
What do I need to do or him?
you probably don't need to be on.
Okay, yeah, I might, well, let's see if I
Let's see
leave.
if you leave, that gives things up. So is that you, if you just unmute your
So
microphone,
that's good.
unmute your microphone, Heather, just to see.
The website's back. It's saying this will turn off your audio. Is that fine? For your computer, yes. Well, it says this will turn off. Okay, it's reading out. Watch, usually you can just click that and it will go blank.
Live with that there. if
Yeah,
you
I
have
we
to.
can live with that.
Instead of that, you could just turn your volume all the way down.
I did.
Oh, okay. You're probably good.
Okay.
It says your mic is off right now. Can you do this now?
It's what, you're not hearing it anymore, so I think you fixed it.
It's too bad that's.
Yeah, I think.
My
for
friend
today we
Eric, who
will-
just said like.
Like, that's our least of our.
That's a concession that
Insurance
is agreeable to
You
make
know,
today.
you're never gonna be able to collect on that. It's
Yeah.
like, hot dang, you're exactly right.
I kind of think he's.
But you could in theory do it, and for other types of insurance, it'd be the same thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, if I actually have Cincinnati insurance, which is what we have at work, guy shows up a week
Yeah.
later or a couple days later, and we get a check in 2 weeks.
Matt,
And I don't see a appreciable
Thank
increase
you.
in my
sure
premium.
it's on.
I sit here and wait for people to show up and I will.
Yeah, that's coming up.
We gotta do that. On the house mics.
I've got
For business or home?
Someone plugged in
Ah,
and then like-
We've got cyber as one. We've got-
I mean, it's like a decent portion of our budget too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Maybe this is down.
Like when I-
oh no.
How you feeling, young man?
Oh, just spry.
Yeah.
Rolling.
They're pretty combative, aren't they?
See the other guy.
At least ours aren't.
Was that, do you have a nerd?
Just putting a
You have
couple
an
down.
excellent administrator,
So.
so that's a big thing.
I'm gonna move these down here since they're already down here, never mind.
So what I find with that,
Noticed everybody down there already had one.
I was paid
Didn't
a
realize
crud
I
ton of
could
money
put it.
for relatively low level of security.
Yeah.
You're talking cyber
Just
specifically.
cyber specifically.
Yeah, okay.
And so what I'm looking at is always like,
I've never seen it.
I- I want to always be in the position where, let's say, whether it's somebody just literally steals everything, right? What's a couple scenarios that are likely to happen?
Oh,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Get overtaken by whatever it is, you know, somebody's ransomware is everything. Somebody does all things. I just want to be able to say, okay, there's 4 or 6 hours out of my day gone. But it's once every, how often? Once a year, maybe,
You.
at the most? Or it's the same thing as if your like main server crashes for something.
Yeah.
And you can also let people in that are.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm gonna
For
do.
someone else, yeah.
You're gonna have to spend the time anyway,
I know.
whether it's a
Brian's coming
hardware
in.
crash. And the only thing I don't know really what to do differently though is
Our
super sensitive data.
And they got our link
CPA
I just,
If they can't get to the bad.
I did send it to.
any of the Dropbox.
For now.
documents. But ultimately just storing an offsite backup, a simple offsite
I was
backup,
in
the
such a
simplest
panic when I thought it
possible
was down.
solution
Now
tends to
it's
be
back
better.
up and we didn't do anything to bring it back up, so I'm like, well,
Yep.
whatever.
Yes, that is a,
Yep.
I'll get a hold of Deanna and just bring it to her attention. So I think we're still.
I have.
I was thinking at home.
Default
It's
page
like-
on my web
Well, on my
browser
computer,
is
it's
LRAPA.
So anytime I'm
computer
going to look at anything on the internet, I see our
Yeah, sure.
website.
Other than that, we're great.
I call the roll
Chair Paxton,
here.
Vice Chair Lovall,
Here.
Director Petchin,
Here.
Director Hensley,
Excuse me, here.
Director Keating, Director Johnston,
Here.
Director Plummer is excused, Director Settlemeyer, and Director Stout.
Here.
We do have a quorum.
Okay, great, thank you. First, second thing on the agenda is, are there any adjustments to today's agenda by any board member or staff? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed with the agenda that was mailed out. We now go to public participation. Time limit is 3 minutes per speaker. Are there any members of the public online that wish to speak about today's agenda?
Not that I can see, Chair.
Okay, and there are none in the audience. Again, are there any comments on a topic not on today's agenda by anyone online or in the audience? Seeing none, there's no public comment today. Are there comments from board members? Brief meeting.
It's exciting.
No one's talkative today. Want to go out and enjoy the nice weather today. We'll now proceed to approval of the minutes of the May 8th board meeting.
Chair, I move approval of the May 8th minutes.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any board discussion, any amendments, corrections? Hearing none, call for the question. All in favor of the approval of the May 8th Board of Directors meeting minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Passes unanimously. Thank you. Kelly, recognize you to come on up and let's report on the Citizen Advisory Committee.
Sure. So during,
Kelly, come up to the
Come on
table,
up to the
please.
table,
Yeah.
please.
Let me get a good mic shot of you.
so during our recent May meeting, Christina from LRAPA actually gave us a presentation on the budget. And so that was really informative and the committee really enjoyed that. And then we had two members that were expiring for their terms. That was Chris Klein and Peter. And so we gave them an opportunity to see if they wanted to renew and reapply, and they both did. And so after they stepped out, we as a group unanimously agreed that we would like to recommend them to the board for another term.
Okay.
That covers it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
So before us is approval of the advisory committee's recommendations to reappoint Chris Klein and Peter Dragovich. Is there a motion to appoint those two to for another term to the Citizen Advisory Committee?
Chair, I move that we approve the Citizens Advisory Committee recommendations to reappoint Chris Klein and Peter Dragovich to the committee.
There a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you. And Kelly, is there anything else going on with
Sorry, this needs to take.
Trying not to be too nervous. No, that was everything. Thank you.
Is that it?
Yeah. Thank you.
So like you gotta call
her one more time.
If I could just, I would just like to express some appreciation to Kelly, who's taken on the role as Jim gets prepared to kind of retire out. I think the CAC, we've had a lot of focus on, and similar with the board of, we really like in-person collaboration and in-person meeting. The virtual facilitation is great, but that emphasis I think will be good for the group in terms of what do we collectively or the CAC say, well, this is what we're interested in. These are the things we'd like to learn about. And these are things we'd like to understand better. And so I'm excited about those opportunities of interest and solicitation of topics from the CAC.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks again. Christina, you want to talk about the financial report?
Yes, so during the financial report section, we're going to be reviewing the April financial report, the audit report, and then discussing anything we need to. Do we want to proceed with Gatlin's audit overview or jump into the financials?
I think there might be a lot more interest and potential discussion on some of the audit things, so maybe we start there and then that
Okay.
gives us time if you're agreeable to Howard.
Yep, I think it's fine.
And we unmute Gatlin and
I made them
There
a
you go.
presenter.
He's there,
so
he's there.
They should be good to go.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
yes, thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so let's get into the audit results.
There's an enthusiastic accountant for you.
Before you start, Gatlin, I just want to
Yeah.
remind the board that in their board packet, there is a staff report about the progress of the audit. If you want to refer to that while he's reviewing, that would be
Page
great.
15.
It's page 15 of the packet. Okey doke.
Great. So we are nearing the completion. We expect to have the financial statements fully finalized and issued by the end of next week. And wanted to give an overview now that we're at a point where we can, present the results of that audit. We intend for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024, to issue a report stating that our opinion is that the financial statements of LRAPA are fairly presented in all material respects for the year. And what that means is that we've done sufficient testing through looking at samples of transactions, performing analytical procedures, and looking at internal controls to conclude that it is very unlikely that there are any material misstatements in the financial statements, meaning there's no misstatements that would cause someone to reach inappropriate conclusions or make decisions such that their decision would be incorrect if they're relying on these financial statements. An audit doesn't provide a 100% level of assurance. We don't look at every single transaction, but we try to be as representative and dig into those areas that we consider to be higher risk enough to feel comfortable with where the financial statements are. In addition to our report on the financial statements, we also issue a report for the Secretary of State on the Oregon minimum standards. And in that report, we look, or rather to be able to issue that report, we look at several different areas of compliance with state law, including how funds are deposited and how they're held. Are they held and collateralized and insured as required by state law? If there are investments, we would look at those to make sure those are in compliance with state laws as well. And we look at how the budget is adopted and also how budget funds are expended throughout the year. And in our review of the financial statements and looking at the budget, we identified 5 areas where the appropriated budget was exceeded. Just going to get those amounts. For the general fund administrative function, which is the legal level of control for the general fund, there were excess expenditures in both materials for services and personnel services, as well as in, there it is, in capital outlay for the general fund. And total budget expenses in excess of appropriations for the general fund were around $350,000. In the Title V fund, we observed a $69,000 excess of transfers out over appropriations. In the TAG fund, we saw $9,700 in transfers out that exceeded appropriations and $20,000 of capital outlay that exceeded appropriations. And in the Airmetrics fund, which was sold during the year, and that's a very kind of messy process and very difficult to budget for. But we observed a $1 million being transferred out in excess of appropriations. That represents the kind of the net position of that fund after everything was all cleared and figured out. That was transferred to the general fund to close out the Airmetrics fund. And also a discontinued operations loss, which is reported as an expenditure of $139,000 that did not have appropriations for it. So those are the results for the Oregon state standards and testing requirements. And in addition to those, we also look at compliance over federal awards and the terms and conditions that the federal government tells us are most important to them. And for the year that we're looking at, for fiscal year 24, second. Oh, I've got it here somewhere. We looked at the EPA funding and the TAG funding. And we did not identify any non-compliance or deficiencies in internal control related to the Targeted Airshed Grant Program or the Air Pollution Control Program support. Those funds represent approximately $1.6 million of the $1.7 million of federal expenditures reported by LRAPA for the year. Going back to the overall financial statement audit, I mentioned we look at internal controls as part of that process. And whenever we are looking at internal controls, if we are testing transactions, doing analyses, or we find anything that requires a change to the financial records that we're provided in order to achieve fair presentation of the financial statements, we do a root cause analysis and we look at what caused the need for that adjustment. And we consider, is that an indication that there is something within internal controls and the structure and operations that could have been different and could be implemented in the future to prevent those kinds of errors. So we had kind of a unique situation during fiscal year 24 with turnover in the folks who are involved with financial reporting and management, as well as the conversion of accounting systems. And throughout our audit, we identified several adjustments totaling approximately $191,000 that were required to correctly state the financial statements. And most of those seem to have arisen as a result of that system conversion. And whenever a system is converted, it's important to test the integrity of the data as it's exported from one system and imported and incorporated into the new system. And we found several errors within that process, several differences between the exported data and the data that was ultimately imported. And LRAPA management, Christina worked through that process with some third-party consultants to really kind of go through and try and clean up all of those differences. But we are reporting that as a material weakness in internal controls for the fiscal year, specifically related to that reconciliation process. And as a result of that finding being reported in the financial statements, the board will need to adopt a corrective action plan at a future meeting that will be submitted to the Secretary of State to comply with the reporting requirements established in Oregon administrative rules and statutes. Which brings us to kind of the next point with, we're pretty late in the audit process. We're well past the end of the fiscal year, the calendar year, and nearing the completion of the fiscal year 25. And so there's two kind of considerations related to the delays and the lateness of the audit being issued. First, for the state, their normal requirement is that the audit be completed and submitted by the end of the calendar year following the end of the fiscal year, and also, or by any approved extension date. Now, we are well past those dates, and as a result, there's not really much that the state does. They don't have any teeth or enforcement options available. There's nothing within statutes that allows them to penalize organizations that submit their financial reports late, as long as they're get reported within 3 years. If financial reports are delayed 3 years or more, then at the state's discretion, they could potentially unincorporate the agency that is not filing reports, and those operations would revert to either the county, municipality, or the state, depending on what kind of agency it is. But we don't expect that to be a problem. For the federal awards, they require that the results of the single audit be reported by the end of March, approximately 9 months after the end of the fiscal year. And the result of missing that deadline is that for the next 2 years, we'll need to ensure that the single audits of the federal expenditures covers at least 40% of the amounts being reported. Which, as I mentioned, this year we looked at 2 programs and covered 90% of the expenditures. So I don't expect that the difference between the normal 20% and the 40% will impact the scope of the audits that are needed in the future. And I'm going to pause there because I've thrown out a lot of conclusions and a lot of information, and see, are there any questions at this point? All right.
I do have one quick question, Gatlin.
Yeah.
So we knew that we were coming in over budget in several categories on the fiscal year 24. What is the consequence of that? So we know that that happened. We know that there's one sentence in the audit report that's going to address that, but what else happens because of that?
Generally, that's all.
Okay.
The state generally doesn't make any kind of comment or require anything for budget being over appropriations unless it is very significant and it's part of a long-term pattern of exceeding appropriations. There is the potential that if there were any funds that were spent in violation of other state laws, funds that had been misappropriated or were used for personal expenses or could be deemed illegal in other laws, if that is also associated with being over the appropriations for the year, then the organization could be liable for those funds if a citizen were to file a complaint and a lawsuit.
But we know that there's no issue with any of those things. It's just
Right.
that we went for budget. Okay.
Yeah.
Then we have a question online, I think now.
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, well, thanks for the report. Can you remind me again, in the general fund, other than capital outlay, the other appropriation that was over executed?
Yeah, so the general fund, its legal level of appropriations is the administrative function, and then transfers, capital outlay, and contingency. And the overages that we saw were in that administrative function. That was, let's see here. That was general fund, approximately $223,000, $8,000 in personal services, and $215,000 in materials and services. And capital outlay exceeded appropriations by $144,000.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. And generally what we recommend is, as you're going throughout the year, if you're starting to see that appropriations aren't going to be sufficient for the expenditures being incurred, to prepare a supplemental budget and adopt that prior to the end of the year.
Unfortunately, we did do a supplemental budget the first month that I started, but it wasn't enough for the whole year. And because the errors were still in existence with the transition, I was unable to determine what the numbers needed to be. So the timing of getting the data corrected from the import and the need to do the supplemental budget before the end of the year, it just didn't happen. And so that was really what resulted in the overages.
So.
Yeah.
what is
and-
The dollar amount, percentage of budget that triggers the need to do a supplemental budget. I mean, we're never going to be 100% precise on budgeting. So what's that number?
I don't know what the best practice is, but anytime we are getting close to 90% of where we should be so far in the year, I'm highlighting it red so we can keep an eye on it. So definitely by the time we're in May, if we are at 90% or more in any category, I would want to do a supplemental budget.
Regardless of
So
the
about
dollar
a 10%. About a 10% dollar amount is what I would
Okay.
be scared of going over. My goal is we wouldn't go over even by $1 by the end of the year.
But we'd know before May, I would hope.
Now we do know.
Yeah. Okay.
Last year we did not because of the conversion issues.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's something where,
I'm sorry, typically the county is 10%, so that's a
Okay.
good benchmark. If we're within 10% or we need to do, if we're gonna think we're gonna go over by 10, then we do a supplemental budget.
But I know City of Eugene, I don't track the county as well, but that usually you typically see City of Eugene in the December timeframe, they'll be looking at supplemental budgets.
I'm actually looking at it every month.
Okay.
Just to see if we need to start thinking about it. So.
yeah. And when it comes to what we're required to report, the state doesn't give us any discretion at all. We've seen times where a client has had debt service that because of a rounding function, they ended up $1 over what they had budgeted, and auditors have received letters from the state if they did not report that as exceeding appropriations. So they require us to report any excess over appropriations. All right. A couple other items that wanted to focus on was related to the closure of the Airmetrics Fund and what the process for that is. So the Airmetrics Fund was sold off, and when that happens, we have to reduce that fund's net position to 0. And so we look at, you do the calculation, what are all the assets that are leaving versus what are the ones that are being maintained? What liabilities are going with the sale? What liabilities are being maintained? And capital assets and any other kind of balance sheet items. And that will calculate kind of the gain or loss on that sale. So there was a residual about $1 million in combined assets of the Airmetrics Fund that was transferred into the general fund. And the resultant gain or loss was approximately $127,000 loss on disposal. So that's how that kind of works. And so not a bad, it was pretty close considering it was, $1 million. So, within 10%. So that worked out pretty well, I think. And definitely simplified or will simplify LRAPA's financial reporting in the future. The financial statements will look a little bit different without that business type activity. So that it'll be a shorter report in future years. And other than that, the last two items that I have is there are additional footnotes and a table near the end of the financial statements related to the LRAPA's entrance into PERS. Those are pretty bare bones right now. There's not going to be a ton of amounts showing there because the actuaries haven't gotten to a point where LRAPA is being figured into the calculation and the allocation of the total pension liability for the state. So once the next actuarial valuation date passes, LRAPA will start appearing and have reportable information for the years subsequent to that. which I think will be either fiscal year 25 or 26. There's usually a 2 to 3 year lag between the actuarial valuation and when information starts showing up. And finally, this is actually going to be my last time, I guess, presenting to LRAPA's board. Next year, you'll have Paul Nielsen. He'll be the engagement partner. He was the engagement partner before me, so I think a lot of you know him. But I recently announced that I'm going to be pursuing other opportunities outside of public accounting. And so I'm working on winding down the projects that I've got and transitioning those to Paul Nielsen and Cody Savy, who are our other audit partners. And that's it. Any questions related to anything for the financial statements or audit?
So are we going to get anything besides this? Is this kind of the extent of, okay, so can you talk through maybe the process
Yeah.
of what the board will get?
As soon as they finalize the actual audit report and financial statements, that will be provided in the next board meeting. I anticipate that will happen in July. We would have attached it now, but it was in such a raw draft form that it just wasn't ready to be on public record yet.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll include it in next month's packet, and
Right.
then you'll be able to see the footnotes he was talking about and all the other things that he's been addressing today. We just didn't want to put off this presentation yet another month. So we went ahead and did the presentation with the actual audit report following.
Yeah, and when that gets presented, it'll be accompanied with a resolution to adopt the corrective action plan that will go with the financial statements to the Secretary of State.
Brian has a question.
Go ahead, Brian.
Galen, thanks again, but, and I know you're leaving the company, but kind of, can you like pencil out what your tentative schedule to do the audit for fiscal year 25 would be?
That was something I wanted to talk about. So our tentative schedule, Christina's indicated that the books should be fully closed and ready for us to start reviewing and planning our audit by the beginning of August. So we'll get the trial balance, general ledger, other documents from her, start planning during August, and we tentatively have scheduled field work for kind of the second week of September. So that gives us a while with the documents to get those into our system, do our planning, select the samples that we'll need to look at, and provide those so that when we come out on site, we can very quickly get through that field work, and targeting issuing the financial statements between, kind of mid-November, mid-December. And so that, is a more aggressive timeline, but we really feel like now that Christina's had some time to really kind of get settled in, and we've cleaned up the system conversion data and dealt with the Airmetrics disposal, that's a realistic timeline that we can achieve, barring any unforeseen circumstances or issues that pop up and delay things.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yes. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you, Galen, and best wishes on your new opportunities.
Thank you.
Hey, Gatlin, will Al continue working with us?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah, we want to try and provide as much continuity as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So have we contracted ISO already?
We have not gotten their letter of engagement with the quote of how much it will be yet, so we haven't actually contracted with them, but we've penciled it in as if we're going to. What Travis and I kind of thought was doing one more year of addressing the findings from this year and getting those cleared would be good to stay with Eisler, and then I'm anticipating no findings for next year or for the year that we're in right now. And so after that one is done, then I think we will want to do a process of getting quotes from several different agencies throughout the area and make sure what direction we want to proceed with.
Okay.
And we will start that process probably before we're even finished with the next audit, because it takes a while to collect those quotes and things.
Howard, I engaged Christina earlier this year on, we've had our auditors, which we are appreciative of, but it's, when I first started LRAPA, there was conversations on the board of, do we need to go out for an RFP for our auditors? And that hasn't yet happened. So I brought it up with Christina, and Christina was a little bit of the brakes on that to say, well, let's stabilize what we're working on right now, because we have a few knots and not intentionally create another knot that we have to untie.
But I do think we need to evaluate and make sure if, the results may be we want to stay with Eisler, the results may be that we need to change. We just don't know until we get those quotes in and review.
What plans are in place that we meet the state's deadline of having an audit by the end of the calendar year?
That is high on my priority list.
Hitting that, I don't think of late.
Yeah, we didn't this year, I know. I don't know how, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
it's definitely a high priority for me because I do not like missing deadlines at all.
all right, any other questions on the audit? And I guess we'll go over the financials.
Okay, so now we're ready to talk about the April 30th financial update. The reason that it doesn't say May 30th, it's always 1 month delayed because I'm still working on closing the books and I don't want to present inaccurate numbers to the board at any point in time. So I'm going to review the April 30 results, but then I'm just going to give you a quick update in reality where we're at today, since we're nearing the end of the fiscal year, so that you'll know. But on the financial report that's in your packet on page 14, I show a few things that are highlighted in red in the final target column. So as of April 30th, we should or could be spent up to 83% of our budgeted expenses. And you can see in the next to the last column is our actual percentage. And then I've highlighted in red the ones that are getting too close or over the 83. And for each one that I highlight in red, I put a footnote at the bottom. So the first two are very related to each other. The capital outlay is over by 1%, which is expected because we've wrapped up the remodel. So that's not going to go over 100% by the end of the year, we know. And so although it's red here, just to keep our eyes on it, I am confident that we're not going to go over budget in the capital expenses or any of the categories for the general fund. The next red highlight is for materials and services under the Title V fund. And it is still under 83%. It's just really close to 83%. So we're going to keep an eye on that as well. We don't have any anticipated unusual expenses coming for Title V. So I am very confident that will also be under budget. And then on the grant fund area, I did discover that I haven't been highlighting it in red and should have been. The numbers I've been reporting are correct as far as our actual spent. But when we did the budget adoption, the very first meeting that I participated in here, we had not included the transfers out or capital outlay that was related to anything to tag 1, tag 2, or EJ. However, there are always going to be transfers out because we receive indirect cost rate reimbursement on those grants, and that money doesn't stay with the grant fund. That money is to cover expenses related to the general fund for just operating, like keeping the lights on, things like that. And so those monies for the indirect cost rate do have to be transferred into the general fund, and we just weren't incorporating that into the budget previously. However, for the budget that was just approved for fiscal year 26, we did reflect that correctly. So I've made the corrections for the next budget on that. So anyways, it should have been highlighted as red, but because you can't make a fraction with a 0 on the bottom, it's not a mathematical allowed thing. Because I had 0 in there as the budgeted amount, because that's what it is. The division wasn't working correctly, so it was just defaulting to a 0. even though all along we have had some expenses in those two line items. So I should have been catching that should have been read all along. So there's not been any change in the actual amount. It's just a change in the way it's reflected on the report. And it will be resolved in the next budget cycle. And then I added to the bottom of the report a total expenditures for all funds consolidated for everyone to see. That's not been there before. I always talked about it, but it was never on the report, but I've created enough space at the bottom of the report where I could add it in. So I did, and it's just summarizing, if you combine and collapse all of the funds together, what are the total actuals and what is the total budget, and then where are we percentage wise. For all of it combined, we're at 62%, and we could be at 83% of spending on our budget. So we're well below what we budgeted when you look at the whole picture. When you look at just each grant fund, or each fund, general, Title V, and grant fund, each one is below the 83% right now. So I really do believe we're coming in under budget for the whole year. And I brought with me my report from Cassell as of today. I just ran it today. And so as of today, we can be spent up to 94.7%. And we are currently, for the general fund, we are at 84%. For the Title V fund, we're at 75%. And for the grant funds, we are at 40%. So our total consolidated percent for all funds is 67.59%. So we're going to come in under budget this year is the driving message that I'm trying to make. I could not tell you these things last year at this point because our data in the software was not corrected yet. I didn't even know how big the problem was yet, or how little the problem was yet. I couldn't even determine any of those things at this point last year. I had joined the organization mid-March and it just was not unraveled yet, which is why we didn't do another supplemental budget. And that's why we went over last year. But this year I am confident in the numbers. The issues have been fixed. I want to give a shout out to my team. Both Robbie and Carissa have worked with me over this past year to improve our processes and improve our checks and balances and improve our efforts of analyzing what's going on and things like that. We're just in such a better place now than we were last year. And one little thing that I want to shout out to Robbie and give her props on. I hope she's listening. She'll be well embarrassed as soon as I finish this sentence. But when I first started, our AR aging report was 3 pages long.
Oh, Lord.
And a lot of that was error metrics, and we had to get that cleaned up. A lot of it was errors that were imported in that weren't factual. We had to get that cleaned up. But a lot of it was we didn't know who we needed to hassle because we didn't have confidence in the report. And so we didn't want to be hassling people if we shouldn't. And, so anyways, we've improved our processes around AR. And I'm thrilled to say that today's report is like 1/3 of a page long. And there is nothing in the overdue categories. Everybody is current. We have one person that's on payment plans, which I'm not going to name. On purpose. He's been enjoying a payment plan for his permit for several years, and I have given him the heads up that honeymoon period is over. The payment plan for permits is intended to support an organization if they are having a temporary financial struggle. So we will always have the opportunity for people to have those kind of payment arrangements. However, a payment arrangement just because you want it is going to be a thing of the past. So we're working to transition him to a shorter payment arrangement for this coming year and then no payment arrangement after that. So AR is looking fantastic and we need it to look fantastic, and I'm glad we're finally there. So thank you to Robbie for all of her hard work in that. Anybody have any questions about the financials? Yes.
A few questions on the first line here, under the general fund, the federal and state revenue.
Mhm.
So that's a little bit under budget. Do you feel confident that that will end up? So it's at 1,005,135 versus about 1.2 million in budget. Do you feel confident that will end up?
The under amount is 176.
Yeah.
All of that is related to the Northwest Air Quest grant pass-through dollars. So we only get the revenue after we pay those dollars out as a reimbursement. And both of the universities have not utilized their full budget, which is fine. They will then roll that into the next year's budget because it's really a 2-year grant, but we manage it per year. And so if it's under by the end of the year, it'll end up being shifted to next year. And then if that happens, we will probably have to do a supplemental budget just to even those numbers out. Because it'll also shift the amount that we're expecting as an expense. You know, it all goes together.
Sure. Okay. And then on under the Title V, the transfers to general fund, where it's 0 and you budgeted 38,700, that just, we haven't done that transfer yet. You'll do it.
Correct. I do it at the end of the year. Whenever I'm working to close the books, I tally up all of our overhead expenses, our indirect expenses that were in the general fund, and we apply a percentage to determine how much is owed to us from the Title V. The way that we come up with that percentage historically was a kind of a weak methodology. So I've created a stronger methodology, which is we take our actual payroll hours reported, and I take what's our number of hours for the whole agency and how many hours were specifically tagged as Title V hours.
Right.
And so last year it was 25% of our overall hours had been reported on people's timesheets as being Title V efforts. So last year we applied the 25% rule, and we figured out which categories are truly overhead expenses. And we took 25% of that, and that's what Title V owed us. I don't know what the percentage will be this year because I don't run that report until after the last payroll of the fiscal year so that I can have a really accurate percentage to be able to apply.
Yeah, makes sense.
So that's kind of a change in the method of how we've done it in the past. I actually wasn't able to determine the methodology that was being used in the past. And when I asked Suzanne about it, she also was unable to determine that. So I just said, well, it's time to create a new strong methodology. So we did.
Great, thank you. And then I guess my last question is, I guess, kind of more qualitative. Like, we've made huge strides here. Like, this is pretty incredible. And I guess this is a question for Travis as well, but just encourage us to document all this stuff so that, like, if for some reason you get abducted by aliens or whatever, and you're not around, that we're not back in the same position, because I would hate to just lose all this progress. So
yes. And on that note, and Travis can talk to this even more, we have fully launched ourselves into as an agency-wide effort to create standard operating procedures for almost every aspect of our work. Have we done all of them yet? No, we're tackling like the most important ones first, but I am already tackling doing all the financial standard operating procedures. And if that is something that is something that the board would love to look at, once we get all the financial SOPs together, I could maybe provide some sort of summary of the SOPs that have been completed and give that to the board at that time. But it's actively being worked on.
I'll just elaborate just briefly because for the time, to take a time too. One of the SOPs that we're just rolled out was on timesheets and some structure on how to answer the question of everybody in the organization has to fill out the timesheets. And so how are we making those decisions of what we're grouping our time to in an effort to kind of provide with us more of that consistency across teams. Rochelle is our administrative manager who we hired. A big point of that was to help LRAPA become more internally structured on what our SOPs, how frequently are we reviewing these SOPs and updating them? Because I do also recognize that you can put a workflow down on a piece of paper, but then if the workflow changes, you need to either look at the workflow and readjust it back to the SOP because that's why we want it that way, or because things just change, the SOP needs to be updated. And so part of the effort in the long term is for us to really have some of that reliable structure. So when we do have transition from a staff person all the way up to executive leadership, we're able to better maneuver through that transition than what we most recently have been able to.
Yeah, okay. And just to follow up on that, Christina, I don't want to or need to see like detailed.
But maybe you
I'll
can
get
make a list
a high
of them.
level
Yeah.
summary at some point, but I don't think it needs to be a ton of work to prepare that present, at least not for me personally. I don't. need-
Okay, well, when we get closer to that, I'll have Travis talk to Howard about what he would like in the staff report and we'll just make that happen.
Yeah, great work though. I mean, if you're closing the books and kicking off the next audit in August, that would be like, that would be
Ideal.
incredible. That'd be great. It'd be a
But that really should be an ideal standard,
Yeah.
and not an exception.
But it would be a huge step forward from where last year was, so
Yeah.
it would be great.
And the
Thank
year
you.
before.
Yeah. Yep.
Just saying.
And maybe the year before that.
Before that, I wasn't here then.
Yeah, I like the forward-looking reflections more
Yeah,
so than the past
exactly.
ones, yeah.
Well, until I joined LRAPA, I had never missed an audit deadline in my life, and it
Yeah.
just has hurt my feelings this year to have had to do it, but it just was unavoidable this year, so.
The board, we haven't been thrilled about it. So, I have a question. In anticipation of budget being underrunning our budget, have you projected or can you project what our increase to reserve funds will be?
Well, let's see. Let me look at my report and see. I do know that I knew that we would be under budget this year when we were creating the 26 budget. So I did reflect the tightening of the belt that has happened this year in next year's budget to make it more accurate. So I did that already. And then for this year, let's see. Let's see if I have an easy way to pull that. I do, I think. I just have to put my eyes on the right spot. Right now, we are under expended in the general fund by 735,000. So that would mean not all of that will go to the general fund because we had budgeted for a shortfall this year. We budgeted because we were spending so much on the remodel. We knew we weren't getting that many additional dollars in. There was no grant specifically for the remodel. We were using the Aerometrics fund balance. So anyways, our expenses were expected to be more than our revenue. So unfortunately, that means we probably won't add anything to the general fund because we spent extra knowing we were going to spend extra on the remodel. But next year, I believe if things go just as well as this year and we're able to be under budget again, we will be contributing back to the reserves next year. I don't think we will be this year.
Cut back on your paperclip usage, everybody.
Let's keep the pizza for the board meetings though.
We have to bring our own lunch. Any other questions of Christina on the audit or budget? Well, thank you very much. It's a very complete report and echo what Michael said, it's night and day as to where we have been and where we are now as far as the financial information. So
Thank you.
We need an action item to approve that April 2025 financial report, Chair.
Yes, I think we do.
sure, absolutely.
I move that we approve the financial report for April 2025.
There a second? Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
If aliens come, I'll help you fight them off.
We want to keep me here. Is that
Yeah.
what we say? I want to
Keep you in place. whatever.
Numbers like that, you guys keep
A little bit behind schedule, but we'll probably get back on. Give an update,
Yeah.
Travis, on the federal grants.
Yeah, Howard, members of the board, on federal grants, here's the refresh of the numbers from last month, which continues to be, we remain on top of our ASAP drawdowns from our federal grant from the EPA So not waiting any reimbursement at that point in time. The EJ government to government grant, we're continuing to work on the closeout. An internal goal that we have is by the end of the month to have that off to the EPA. It's due July 20th. So the intent is to get it to them by the end of this month, so they have time to give us feedback and we can iterate and improve. A notable thing I will mention regarding our federal grants. So there was a grant effort under the Environmental Justice Government to Government Grant that was a MOU between the Oregon Health Authority and Lane County Public Health to do some health research, basically to download what's called APAC data, which is all payers, all claims data. So anytime an insurer spends money, there's an IDC-10 code associated with that item. We can download it. We can compare it to, or Lane County Public Health can compare it to our smoke data to say, what is the potential financial cost to our society from a smoke intrusion? This was an effort that was funded under the EJ Government to Government grant that was terminated. However, in our targeted airshed grant 2.0, there was $25,000 in grant funding that was specific towards health research, but wasn't identified as a real programmatic opportunity yet. I engaged with the EPA to see if we could utilize that funding to continue this effort that was under the EJ Government to Government grant that was not, that was terminated. Region 10's response to that was positive. So the next steps is engaging more firmly with OHA and Lane County Public Health to continue the spirit of that work. I've informally engaged with them and there's interest in scope that's being discussed, and with the permission from the EPA to use the fund in those ways. I think that's a body of work that we'll be able to further despite the setback from that grant being terminated.
Any questions, anybody? EPA office changes and budget?
Yes, Chair Howard, members of the board. So this is just an informational update since the new federal administration took office in January. The EPA has made some changes that does have some impact on the regulatory scope here. For time, I'll be a bit more brief, but essentially it boils down to the EPA under Administrator Lee Zeldin of the EPA is closing two offices that have been open since the EPA's founding. The first is the Office of Atmospheric Protection, which is OAP. This is the office that manages items like greenhouse gas reporting. The Energy Star program is under this office, Acid Rain program under that office as well. The EPA is also closing the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards, or OAQPS. So this is where the National Ambient Air Quality Standards are set by this office, as well as a small business assistance program that the EPA offered that also is closing. In addition, the EPA is opening two new offices. The first is the Office of Clean Air Programs and the Office of State Air Partnerships. And so there's not yet a lot of formal structure on how these offices will exist. But the take home is the Office of State Air Partnerships is how we as locals or states will be able to collaborate and coordinate and communicate with the EPA. And then the Office of Clean Air Programs is going to pick up all of the work that the EPA is still interested in doing that's being left over from the Office of Atmospheric Protection or Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards. For LRAPA being a local air agency, this is a lot more influence on kind of SIT planning and state work planning, which much of the engagement or reflection on these changes becomes more of an Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. But we still have an interest in understanding what these broader changes are. And I think another component that you'll see in the staff report that's worth mentioning is the president's proposed budget is he referred to and announced was the skinny budget. And what this would do is essentially remove funding for Section 105 and Section 103 grants under the Clean Air Act. In the past, there has been some pretty severe budget cuts to the EPA. When President Trump was in office in 2018, it was a 31% cut. Congress put $2.4 billion back. In fiscal year 19, it was a 30% cut. Congress put $2.7 billion back. 31% in fiscal year 2020, $3 billion went back, and a 26% cut in fiscal year 21, of which $2.5 billion went back. So all to say that Congress has to approve the budget and their deadline is October 1st. if what's proposed, the loss of the Section 105 and 103 grants ends up being what is in the adopted budget by Congress, that would represent, not counting our Northwest Air Quest grant, which is pass-through dollars, that would be a general fund loss to LRAPA of about $364,000 over a fiscal year. In short, these changes are kind of historical in the loss of offices that have been open since the EPA's founding. I think that change can oftentimes bring about improvements, maybe not necessarily at first, but I do think that the opportunity is making relationships and setting a new way of doing work. For us in LRAPA, it's really more of us being plugged in with the EPA, developing those relationships as the new administration sets in, and updating the board to any changes from there and that may have an impact here locally to Lane County.
Any questions? Thank you for that report. Take a breath.
Yes. Well, for the next one, I'll actually pass. So this is a staff report, informational update on our outdoor season. But Matt Sorensen, our Public Affairs Manager, manages our relationships and is point on that program. So I'll pass the mic to Matt to share out on this staff report.
Good afternoon, board members. I really will try to just summarize is essentially the outdoor burn season. We got lucky last summer when the wildfires had happened and I had just joined then. We didn't get a lot of smoke impact here as we opened outdoor burning a little bit on time. It was a little late. Kind of typical community response, folks getting frustrated that it felt like it was too close. You know, we get some complaints. Over the course of the year, essentially, it's been pretty standard. What I do like is I built a relationship with Chief Wallace out of Mohawk Valley. He also oversees Lane Fire. Travis,
Fire Defense Board.
Fire Defense Board, yes. There's a lot of fire organizations in our county, and the Fire Defense Board works in conjunction with Oregon Department of Forestry to kind of help establish when fire season is active and inactive. This year, they did give us a call as a heads up to say, hey, we are contemplating going into fire season earlier than planned. Is your agency okay with that? And I think what I appreciate most is it's a great sign to be working ahead of time, you know, not finding out with everyone else that like, oh, it's fire season, we'll need to do that, which allows us to then communicate with our stakeholders in Lane County and forewarn them that, hey, this is upcoming and will be there. Understandably, folks with larger properties, et cetera, they struggle when they find out that it's being cut short because there are folks with a lot of vegetation on their property, a lot of things that they want to get burned. And when we are doing that in conjunction with fire season, it does help because it's a united front. We can do that. We will expect to see quite a few complaints still come in of illegal outdoor burning. But overall, I think the program's going well. We have been able to issue some additional permits that were people trying to do burns who were outside the scope of an outdoor burn. And I'll kind of leave it at that for now.
Yeah, I'll just add that June 7th was when outdoor burning was closed for the season by rule. Our rules allow it to go through June 15th before it closes by rule. Our authority, again, is just smoke authority. And so when either it's local fire authority or state fire authority says it's fire season, then that predates any authority we can provide on a burn or not burn. Because culturally, Lane County, I think, is very accustomed to us and our website and the smoke being a yes today, not tomorrow kind of thing. We do take provide a lot of that service of updating folks and letting them know what the change is, whether it's fire or smoke related curtailment of outdoor burning. And a quick look into the wildfire season for this year. It does look to be a bit of a grave season. We had a wet winter, which means lots of vegetation growth. And the summer forecast outlooks look to be dry, but it's not the dryness that is much of a concern in comparison to the heat. Because when we have our heat waves where temperatures get really hot, all the vegetation dries out entirely and then remains dry until moisture returns. So it's the extreme heat that really emphasizes fire danger more so than a lack of moisture through the summer.
Any questions? Thank you, Matt. I know, it says a casual observer, the news media, I think was pretty good about announcing that and giving LRAPA notoriety too. Good at that, but anyway, it's obviously, you know, that the outreach is working and good job. Okay.
And just like that, we're back on schedule.
Yeah, we're back on. Appreciate that. You want to talk about supplemental environmental project?
Yes, Chair Howard, member of the board, I'm actually pretty excited about this. So this is a program that is not new, though I think it may feel new only because not much has been done with the program for a number of years. But there is a program that LRAPA has, that the state of Oregon has as well as DEQ. It's a supplemental environmental project. And essentially what this allows for is in the circumstance where we are taking enforcement action against someone and issuing a civil penalty, we have the legal framework where we can allow that penalty offset to be used to fund a environmental project. There is requirements in terms of it has to be regionally kind of nexus located to where the issue took place. It needs to be an environmental project that's improving or preventing environmental degradation, as well as has to be a penalty that's over $2,000 for this to be an opportunity to be pursued. And if it's over $25,000, our policy is we have to bring that to the board to have a conversation about before we can fund these SEPs. So internally, we've been working to pull out the old policy from the early 2000s, give it a fresh look, update it, make some adjustments. And then the next step is having a conversation with the board about this program that we're looking to revitalize, and then doing some public outreach to solicit some applications, which could be some good environmental projects. I will mention that one that's already identified that could have some potential is supporting the Oak Ridge yard debris disposal program. There is a disposal program where communities can drop off their yard debris and then it'll be chipped as opposed to being burned. And so structurally, we could receive an application from that program. We review it, we could potentially approve it. And then when we are in an enforcement space, those who need to pay a civil penalty can choose to up to 80% of their penalty go to support and fund this project. So Oak Ridge is one that's been identified, and I think Cottage Grove has a wintertime yard debris program that has been the last few years. So I think that's another potential place where we could see an ongoing application and maybe see some of those dollars potentially going in that direction.
You mentioned it had to have some nexus, so it'd have to have some closeness to the project. So would it have to be an infraction, for example, in Oak Ridge or next to Oak Ridge in order to be funding an Oak Ridge project, just as a hypothetical?
So I would say that no, it doesn't necessarily need to be an enforcement in Oak Ridge for it to take place in Oak Ridge. By regionally, I view that as really kind of a western versus eastern kind of Lane County. If there was an item that was an issue in Oak Ridge, if that was to fund a project in Florence, that would seem to be a little bit of a disconnect. But I do see as an opportunity as in the metro region where there is a lot of enforcement, there could potentially be opportunities for some of those regional areas to potentially benefit from this. Otherwise, as required by state statute, any of our civil penalties, LRAPA does not get to hold on to. Those by state statute go to the Lane County General Fund. So I think that's an important component to make mention here, that this program would allow opportunity for some dollars to be used for environmental projects as opposed to going to the Lane County General Fund.
Don't you worry, it's not millions of dollars that we're gonna miss.
And our enforcement dollars do vary, fluctuate year to year. We can have an instance where we place a lien on a property because of a need, and then years later that lien gets paid, and so that comes in. So the amount of enforcement dollars we assess versus what we collect are not a year-to-year equivalent, but generally it's about $35,000 to about $50,000 a year is what we collect in civil penalties.
So last year it was 21,000 and so far this year it's 41,000. So that's how much it can fluctuate, but it's not millions like you're saying.
It's not gonna build a baseball stadium.
I will say that when I first started LRAPA and was just more on the periphery listening to the board meetings, I recall discussion being had of recognizing civil penalties and how might those be used in different ways and exploring of does it go to the general fund for Lane County, does it go elsewhere? And the outcome of that exploration was, well, the state requires it goes this direction. But under our legal framework, we do have this SEP opportunity. In the past, LRAPA has utilized this. We don't have like a website at the moment. We're working on getting one together to make this more of a publicly known program so we can accept applications. And then when we are in an enforcement conversation, we cannot encourage or promote or say we think this is a good idea. We can just present as a neutral opportunity that those paying the civil penalty could choose to act on if they so wanted.
So thank you, Chair. And so in that vein, I was thinking to myself, why would someone want to participate in this program if they've already been assessed fine? And I thought if there was some way that they would, hey, you could save 10% on your fine if you approach this program. That's not something that we can offer. Says we have to just keep it where it's at. Okay, I want to clarify that. Thanks.
I will, to your point, though, Commissioner Lovall, the instance where someone would maybe be interested in this is an example of an industry source where they are self-reporting that they had some monitoring requirements that they were supposed to do. And perhaps because of staff transition, they missed those requirements and they're self-reporting. And because of our rules, regulations, and our process, we say, well, you are correct. And so we need to enter into enforcement. And so in that circumstance, I could see a source wanting to say, hey, we self-reported these dollars that we're required to pay. We're actually using them to fund this local project. And look at how good of a community component we're bringing to Lane County.
Right, yeah.
I will say that, at least on a federal level, I've had some experience where industries or others that have had enforcement actions at supplemental projects have been, they're not overly common, but they do those at the federal level as well. Especially like if they're finding a municipality, instead of just public dollars going to upstream to the federal budget, the local community can take some of that money and do something with it rather than just, paying their traffic ticket. So there's, a lot of goodwill and a lot of benefit, I think, of those things happening appropriately.
And I see any ongoing or yard debris removal programs to do instead of burning it to chipping it, such as seen in the Cottage Grove or in Oak Ridge, could be prime opportunities for us to receive an application, for us to put that on our SEP approvable list. And then anytime we're in an enforcement conversation above a penalty of $2,000, this is an opportunity for a decision to be made by that entity to support a local community if they so chose.
So Travis, am I reading this correctly that LRAPA would get 20% of the penalty amount?
It's, I appreciate that question for clarification. It's, we only up to 80% of that penalty amount could go towards a supplemental environmental project. The 20% is still reserved and that would go to Lane County General Fund. So it's up to 80% of the penalty can be chosen to be used to fund a supplemental environmental project.
Got it. So there's no essentially concept of transfers to the general fund to cover administrative overhead for LRAPA.
The only thing that we can recover are any costs related to, if we had a cost related to placing a lien or, if there was a direct cost that we incurred, we can recoup those dollars, but we can't actually make any money off of it at all.
Sure. And so I guess the question then is, do you feel that like the incremental cost to administer this, to revive this program is reasonable? Yeah.
I think so. And it'd be one thing if the scope of our enforcement was we had like a lot of enforcement that was taking place. My view on enforcement is it's a real effective tool to assure that you're seeing compliance, but it's kind of the last tool that you want to reach for to use. So in that circumstance, I think the amount of work that it would require for us to make this program successful would be generating our website so we can have solicit applications, the process and work that goes to reviewing and putting those applications on our website, and then the administrative costs of putting documentation in our enforcement communications that we send, as well as keeping track from a financial perspective, what dollars should be going where. And I don't think that that administratively is a huge overhead.
Yep, thank you.
I will say that Travis and I, on what they call, talked about this, and it was my suggestion that staff take a look at, what should be the minimum dollar amount, because,
Sure.
if you have a $500 fine, is that really worth
Yeah.
fine? Because there is a cost to the agency. It may not be much, but, it's like managing a project, a $10,000 project costs as much as $1 million almost to manage, overhead and all that kind of stuff. So you have to think about that. And also just what the benefit would be of that project.
Yeah, and so the $2,000 minimum was a recommendation from Howard that is included kind of our approach. And Colleen, did you have something you wanted to add?
Just for a couple of clarifications. So a fine has to be at least 2,000 before they can request to be a part of a SEP project. And additionally, the only monies that we can keep from enforcement fines is if it's related, if they contest a case. Money, contested cases or economic benefit is the only money that we.
Well, coincidentally, Lane County waives our fees for filing liens anyways, so that example was probably a bad one for me to use anyways, but because it's a big fat zero either way, so.
Thank you. Anything else on this?
I just wanted to let the board know that this is something I'm working on trying to revitalize for LRAPA. And if there's any interest, feedback, or direction that you think would be good to follow, I am very interested.
Look forward to seeing first project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Okay. Permit lifecycle.
Yes. So Chair Howard, members of the board, Max is down on, oh, yes, thank you. I appreciate that. That is an important detail. Chair Saxon, members of the board, Max and I are tag teaming this presentation. We're on both sides of the table, but I asked Max that he to be my in the weeds kind of scapegoat if it gets starts to get a little bit deeper than
Volunteered for that?
He was volunteered. Yeah. Was volunteered. Yes, so I'm going to take a swing at questions, but then I will be definitely tapping out when I need that deeper subject matter expertise. But so one of the things I really hope that we can see more of from the board too is just an interest in, hey, this particular topic, I would love to learn more about it for LRAPA. And I think that some of the board conversations kind of had led to this, which is let's go through a bit of the LRAPA permit cycle 101 for the boards. And I think that those interests in those topics or opportunities are great. And I would really love to kind of reach a row motion, so to speak, of a presentation kind of like this each meeting. So for our foundation for assuring that we have clean air here in Lane County and across the country is through the issuing of permits. So in Oregon, we issue air contaminant discharge permits, which are ACDPs. And this is the foundational approach to assure that we have public health, that we're meeting the national ambient air quality standards that the EPA sets. It helps us to ensure that compliance is taking place because we take all of the complicated rules and regulations, and the point of an ACDP is to put all of those into an easy to understand and follow list of permit conditions that if a source says, if I do all of these things, I will not be violating any of the rules or regulations that could get me into trouble. As well as an opportunity for the community to then reflect on what are those permit conditions and do they think the permit conditions could be modified in some way that would meet their interests or their perspective better. So that is the ACDP and is how, or a large majority of our work, our largest program that LRAPA has is our stationary source permit program. So the role is to create these enforceable documents that are legally enforceable, that does authorize a source to create emissions or to put that pollution into the air. The purpose is so that way everybody is operating in the same fair, equitable way, that we do have limits and some control on how much emissions are being created. And everybody can then be applied to those conditions the same. And then our main rules for our ACDPs is in Title 37, which is under the ORS, that 468A. And then below there is a list of the different types of permits that we will issue. I will pause here and see if Max can kind of talk a little bit about some of the maybe well-known sources that the board could be familiar with that meet some of these quality categories.
Yeah, sure, Travis, thanks. And then I just want to add on that, you know, under the authority bubble, we do implement the Title V regulations by reference. So the state has a number of programs, including Title V, greenhouse gas, you know, or instead of us recreating those on our own books, we just implement them by reference. But yeah, Travis, so examples of manufacturing and industrial processes, those could be anywhere from our largest single stationary source, which is the pulp and paper plant. They make container board, down to aggregate resource facilities that make asphalt and rock crushing facilities. We have a lot of fuel combustion sources, those sources that have boilers that make steam for their products, whether it be veneer drying, plywood pressing, or other heat uses. Power generation, we have 3 or 4 cogeneration facilities here in Lane County. So they make steam, but they also sip some of that steam to run a turbine to create electricity. Quite a few surface coating and printing operations, anywhere from, you know, display manufacturing to furniture manufacturing. Petroleum and fuel storage. We have a large bulk gasoline terminal here where the gasoline pipeline that comes down the Lamb Valley terminates here. And so we have, you know, trucks filling up and at that facility. And then we also have over 100 gasoline dispensing facilities that we regulate under permit. Waste management and incineration, examples of those include the wastewater treatment plant, and we have an active and some closed landfills that we have on permit. And last bullet there is operations subject to these federal standards that for new sources or sources that are subject to hazardous air pollutant standards. Those are things like metal fabrication facilities all over the county that we regulate under permit.
Thank you, Max. So there is this thing in Oregon called the plant site emission limits, which recently has changed. Oregon used to allow for a generic plant site emission limit, which says this is just generically what your limit could be, and you can do changes to the facility so long as you can demonstrate that you're under that limit. But it's a little bit more focused and specific to the sources today than what it was a few years back. But essentially, it is this is your line, and don't put any more emissions above this line. And that is a center point to how air regulation takes place in the state of Oregon. This graph here shows the different types of permits we can issue. So they start with the most complex. So the Title V operating permits, these are federal permits that Oregon is delegated the authority to implement that program. And then that authority is delegated one more time to LRAPA in Lane County. Of which there are 14 sources. Our standard ACDP is essentially a state permit that's not big enough or complex enough, or there's not enough emissions really that you need to have a federal permit. And then simple and general and basics are less than that. A general permit is something where if you have a business that's doing all of these processes like issuing or giving gasoline dispensing, all gasoline dispensing facilities are basically doing about the same thing. So we have one permit, that's a general permit, and then gasoline dispensing facilities are assigned to that permit. The one exception in Lane County is the Costco permit. They actually have, are not on a general because of the amount of throughput of gas that they have. But that's just an example of what a general permit is. So kind of going to go through these somewhat quickly. Really, the point of this slide that I wanted to show is mostly to call out what the 10-year permits are. So if you have a basic, a general, or a simple ACDP, that is a 10-year permit. So you get your permit and it does not need to be renewed for another 10 years. As we get into the standard ACDPs or then the Title V permits, those are on 5-year permit cycles. So the difference, I think, really between the two is the emission amounts. So in the Title V box, the criteria pollutants, so those are all of the regulated pollutants under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. If you put more than 100 tons of those in the air per year, either combined or singular, then you need a Title V permit. And a hazardous air pollutant, if it's single over 10 or combined over 25, then you are required to have the Title V permit. Some sources will take a permit condition where they'll say, okay, well, we will limit how much work we're doing or how much production we're making. So therefore our emissions will not go above the line that causes us to have a Title V permit. And then part of our work is making sure that they are not producing more than what they said they wouldn't do. That would equate to more of those emissions. Max, did I have any misspeaks there?
I guess, yeah, a little fact check on the criteria pollutants of 100 tons per year. That's per pollutant. So particulate matter, carbon monoxide. Yeah, so it's not a combined amount.
Thank you.
That was a good job.
So what goes into an air permit? This is how we are able to, as a regulator, understand what the source is doing on paper. So we can say, yes, you are meeting all of those permit conditions and you are not exceeding your plant site emission limits. So the first thing is we set what those limits are, that we say, here's the line, don't go above it. The monitoring, we require that they do monitoring to make sure that they can account for, or that monitoring they're doing can be accounted for in demonstrating that they are meeting those limits. A source test or a stack test, that's essentially where we can require a source to go and take a sample of the emissions that are coming out of their site. And it can be analyzed, or at least the third-party source tester can analyze it to say, well, here's how much of each of these pollutants are. And when you created this pollution, you were doing this much work. And so using that, we can get a ratio or a variable that can help us estimate if a source is above or below their emission limits. The record keeping is really important because if, for example, a source says, we're only going to be so productive and then we're going to stop, so we're not exceeding any emission standards, the reporting, the record keeping is their records demonstrating what their production levels are. So we can have a permit condition that says you need to log this, you need to write this down. So when we inspect, we can look at that data and make sure that you're meeting your permit conditions. And then reporting, we can have requirements that says if A happens, then this reporting need has to happen so we can be in the loop and understand what those changes to rules and regulations are. Anything to add, Max?
Are there any permits that are, quote, grandfathered into the system? Like, is there, hey, I've got a 25-year air quality permit that I can still work off of, or is everything on this 10-year cycle?
So I think there's two kind of components that will answer that question for you. The one is if there is a permit term that's about to be expired, if the applicant submits their application to us, like for Title V source, for example, 6 months ahead of when it's expired, if we are deficient in issuing them a new permit before that 6 months is over, that permit enters what's called being administratively extended. So the source can still operate until LRAPA is able to get them that permit. And when we refer to something is on backlog, that's what that means, is how many permits are administratively extended that we are still working on getting those permits to them. And then the other component where someone could be grandfathered in is under a Cleaner Air Oregon program, which is a state program. It's a toxic air contaminant program. So we say, how much air emissions are you creating as a source? Where is it going? How much are people breathing? And how toxic is it? And what is that health risk? If you are a existing source, what's considered to be too much health risk is higher than if you are a new source, a new business that's wanting to set up, establish yourselves. Those acceptable health risk limits are lower. So that's an example where someone who is already existing can benefit from that pre-existing before rules began versus otherwise. And then is there any other example that comes to mind, Max?
Yeah, Travis, in addition to those two examples, a third example of grandfathering is Oregon's unique baseline emission rate rule. So it's unlike any other in the country, but Oregon established 1978 as any facility that was in existence in that period can claim those emissions that they actually emitted in the baseline year as their essential
essentially there's 0 point at which additional increases would be considered before new source review or additional controls would be required. So that's often referred to as grandfathered emissions.
It sounds like it's just the standard that's grandfathered in. Everybody is on a new permit though. Like, we're not letting things be grandfathered for years and years and years as far as the permit issued, right?
Correct. Yeah, yeah. It's just slightly different. Kind of grandfathering.
Thank you. So then this here is our permitting process, which begins with the applicant submitting to us their information. That goes through an administrative review. So we look and we say, well, did you fill out all of our questions? And if you didn't fill out all of our questions, we give it back and say, please fill out these questions and bring it back to us. Once it passes administrative review, it then gets in the hands of the technical staff to look through it. And then they say, your technical details are incomplete. And here you go. Here's that information back. I would say a lot of that recursive loop there is where LRAPA spends a lot of time and effort in helping sources understand what their requirements are so they can navigate through these rules and regulations. But once we feel like we have all the information we need, we draft the permit, then it goes through an internal review, which is a peer-to-peer review for permit writers. We also have our inspectors do a review as well, because they're the folks who say, I'm at the source, I'm doing an inspection. Does this permit condition on paper make tangible, applicable sense to the reality of which is the source and their processes? So their review is really important to make sure that paper to reality are in sync. Once we have a draft that we're ready to share, that goes to the applicant review. There can be some back and forth that takes place in further developing there. Once all parties involved are happy with that permit, it goes out to public comment, which is the public's opportunity to say, well, here's our input on the stake that we hold. That can result in a public hearing if we recognize that there's a need, or if in our titles we require that public engagement, we will go through and do that as well. If it's a Title V permit, because it is technically a federal permit that we have delegated authority to issue, we do send it off to the EPA for them to review. They have 45 days to review it. If we don't hear from the EPA within that 45 days, we have the freedom to issue the permit. We can request the EPA provide an expedited to review where we can shorten that window of time. But most of the instances, we just give the EPA their 45 days to assess and get back to us with any changes. And then the permit is issued and signed, and it'll be renewed in 5 years or 10 years, depending on the permit type. And which in the slide later on, you'll see, we'll get an inspection. So one of the things that we really encourage, and I think that this is a service that LRAPA can offer, maybe a little bit more involved than perhaps what the state offering may be, which is a pre-application meeting. That's essentially a sit down, an informal, what do you have going on? What's taking place for you? And let us understand that so we can take our understanding and help you understand what forms you need to fill out, what is required for you to get your permit, for you to move forward with your project, and for you to be successful as a business while meeting your environmental requirements. An important thing to mention here is the land use compatibility statement. So when we receive an application, a LUX or land use compatibility statement is a part of that application material. So this is essentially the item that's issued from the local city municipality or from the local county that says, we agree this thing that you want to do as a business in this location, we are happy with it and we are good with it. And we have to receive that approval before we will even begin to further engage on the source. We have engaged with Lane County as well as the city of Eugene to talk about our stake in our issue, in our work, and how the land use compatibility statements are incorporated into that. We want to be collaborative in that space because I think it can be challenging for planning department to think about where a facility should or should not go and have reflections on air emissions when that is not their subject matter expertise, that is ours. So that's an important component of some collaboration between us and local municipalities or the county. I mentioned briefly here Cleaner Air Oregon. So this is a statewide program. It regulates what the state calls toxic air contaminants, and there's 600 different pollutant types. The federal perspective calls them hazardous air pollutants, and there's only 188. But this is where the program's designed to go to a source and say, of these 600 pollutants, what's coming out of your emissions? How much are in there? Where are they moving to? How is the terrain, the topography, the weather affecting those emissions where they're moving? Who are the receptors? Who's breathing those emissions? And how potentially harmful to health is that? And that health risk analysis is done on sources. If they're existing, there's a list that we go through and we're working through that list. If they're a new source, they have to go through Clean Air Oregon before they can get their permit.
So which industries in Lane County are subject to offhand?
I will tap out for that one to Max.
Well, yeah, Chair Howard, essentially all of them are. We have established a prioritization, which we call in different facilities. So we have a group 1, group 2, group 3. Travis said any new facility that is on a simple standard or Title V needs to go through Clean Air Oregon right away. But yeah, so we have about 60 facilities in those group 1, group 2, and group 3. General ACDPs that go through it a little differently. We essentially do an agency initiated risk assessment on the suite of sources that are assigned to those permits.
So does our website or does DEQs have a list of industrial facilities that are subject to Cleaner Air Oregon?
Yep, our prioritization list is published on our website, and each source that has either completed Clean Air Oregon or is going through the process that we've called in, there's a specific web page for that source, and then we publish information updated on our progress and data that they give to us, such as the emissions inventory. If there is a risk analysis or any modeling, those documents are published on that web page as well. So the way that we assure that we have our compliance oversight is we monitor emission limits through our inspections and the reporting that our sources are required to follow. We do give technical assistance and we answer questions. If a source wants to engage with us to say, help us understand our permit better because we want to make sure we're following it, I see those as wonderful questions because they're opportunities to share and all get on the same page. We follow up on compliance deadlines and milestones. If someone is required to send us a report, like just this morning, we had a peer meeting, an ops meeting, and we were talking, Lowe's conversations include, well, whose report have we not heard yet? And how are we going to get their attention so we can make sure that we're hearing that report? And then follow up on an enforcement perspective if necessary. We conduct regular inspections to verify compliance. So the permit term, inspection takes place, but also items like community complaints can drive us to take a visit to a source to assess their processes and what may be going on and looking for instances of non-compliance or otherwise. And then when we do find issues, we can and have the authority to issue enforcement. And as I mentioned earlier in this meeting, my perspective is enforcement is a needed and necessary tool, but it should be one of the last tools that you reach for. I think that a collaborative, positive engagement is going to do a lot more in environmental compliance than potentially antagonistic one. And that is a brief overview of our permit and our work from our largest program, which is our stationary source permitting program.
Anyone have any questions?
Context, I was curious because 100,000 tons is a hard thing to get my head around. I was like, well, what's 1 ton of emission? If you were driving a 2024 F-150, you would need to drive for a contiguous 41 hours at 50 miles per hour to emit roughly 1 ton of CO2. So that gives you an idea of how much emissions, that's the minimum to be a Title V.
How many hours?
41
41 hours.
50 miles per hour to emit 1 ton of CO2. Yeah, so that's how big the Title V's, that's just to enter into that type of net.
Travis, can you just give us a high level overview of the pricing that our permit holders look at for the different types of permits, the 5 different types of permits?
Yeah, I'll have to maybe tap to Max for any dollars, and I don't know if you'll have them on the top of his mind, but I will say that our permitting process is people do not, or sources not pay for renewals. it's an annual fee process, an annual fee assessed to support the program. There is a application fee that's assessed. There also is a modification fee. So if a source wants to come in and do something different, make a change to their permit. And all of it is designed to support the program of issuing the permit itself. But as far as dollars and cents, Max, do you have more insight you can?
Yeah, just a rough estimate. I don't know the exact amounts off the top of my head, but like say it's the most complicated ACDP that we have is a standard ACDP. Their annual fee is about $16,000. A Title V facility has a base fee of about $16,000, but then they pay $90 per ton of accessible emissions. So basic ACDPs are lowest cost. They pay about $500 or $600 per year, I would say.
Got it. That's helpful. Thank you.
And one of the items from a revenue perspective, the majority of our revenue is fee-based revenue.
Yep.
We do receive federal, state grants as well as local partner support, but most of our revenue is fee-based.
Anybody else? Thanks. I think that was very helpful.
It was, yeah.
So, good overview. From my perspective, I used to be, environmental consultant. Air is by far and away, I think, the most complex regulatory program there is out there, just because all the different sources and all the different pollutants, and it's just Title V permit can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to prepare, depending on the complexity of the facility.
At our city council meeting, it was talked about where there's noxious fumes from marijuana.
Consumption.
No, just it wasn't even consumption, some kind of processing that's happening right on our main street. And that kind of thing, and the realization where, there isn't measurable hazards. Not really much we can do about it unless we want to do some kind of new standards, and then we can't grandfather that. So if we want less in the future, perhaps we got to do some kind of policy change.
We do hear complaints from folks who's not necessarily from a cannabis consumption odor complaint, although I think maybe we have gotten some of those, but just from the grow itself. We don't, in Oregon, we don't regulate odors. Our regulation is processes. So to your circumstance, depending on the size of the grow and some of the processes or the equipment that they have on site to allow that to take place, that could reach a point where they need an air permit. But for the grow itself, that is not something that we would have oversight of.
It's an closed building, so I don't know that they're growing in there. Are they just?
They can, yeah, they can.
Oh, okay. Well, I know it can be done, but
Is it
I'm not-
cyclic though, Jim?
No,
Grow seasons like every 3 months. When I'd run through my neighborhood, you'd know who they were.
They like to do them indoors for security reasons because it's a high theft
Yeah.
opportunity. And so a lot of times grows are indoors for that reason.
You can grow
Take a look at-
bulks too, so you can have multiple levels of stuff.
Take a look at how fast their electric meter is.
It's directly related.
Water and electric.
Use as much as a data center problem.
Rochelle, did you have something to add?
If you're interested, the city of Eugene does have an ordinance regarding order that I actually wrote. Something to look at if you guys are
Thank you.
interested in policy around odor, around the manufacturing and residential.
How's that enforced, out of curiosity?
Complaint driven, and then we go out and I did go out and assess whether they have the right equipment to be able to mitigate some of the odor.
Here you go, Jim.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll move on. Director's report.
Yes, thank you, Howard. There's kind of 5 minutes left, so I'll be a little bit more brief. But in short, again, the executive highlight on the front page, I think if you only read one thing and you read that one page, that should be, I think, a holistic summary. We had some good air quality throughout the month of May. There was only one day in Eugene that registered above that good air quality and was in moderate. We have seen some complaints, a lot of them smoke related. I do think outdoor burning, people recognizing that, hey, it's May and June is usually when outdoor burning season closes. So I should take advantage of the opportunity now. We have moved into our LINFO version 3. So LINFO, it stands for LRAPA info. So that's an internal database that we have been upgrading with LCOG. On Tuesday, we launched into that LINFO 3.0. I think this is a much more user-friendly interface. We're getting reports out of it that I think in time will be much more effective. And at the moment, we're kind of in a bug hunt to try to find the bugs and squash them. We have filled an environmental coordinator 2 position, which we had quite a bit of a lot of interest in it, over 25 candidates that we had to parse through, which I think is a real positive thing, though challenging, no doubt. On the community outreach side of things, Matt Sorensen did quite a bit in the month of May, went to Ghost Rios Elementary to give some presentation to some 5th graders there. We engaged with the We Are Bethel celebration, which was interesting. The contractors who were contracted to do the on-site facility work for J.H. Baxter and removing the retorts and cleaning up that site. They joined the We Are Bethel celebration and the community kind of gave them a round of applause and expressed some appreciation and handed out some cards. And I think they were hoping for alcoholic beverage, but we had seltzer water for them. So they appreciated that and enjoyed that. Want to mention our permitting backlog rate, thanks to Max and the ops folks, is at 5%, which is well below the 20% goal that the EPA sets as a target. So I am really thankful and appreciative of that. May, we issued 8 outdoor burning letter permitting programs, completed 44 asbestos inspections. And as Christina shared on our general fund, we are about 5 to 6% under budget for the year. And then finally, fire season begins on June, or began, I should say, on June 7th.
I'd say that was a pretty strong corrective year overall. Well done, team.
Thank you.
I wanted to add to something about the staffing note. So we just filled a position, but that position was needed to be filled because of an internal promotion within the organization. So at least it wasn't yet another turnover as far as a negative turnover. So I think that's a important thing to know as well.
And on page 36 of the director's report, this is an item that is new, but it's more of an insight into our organizational capacity and our growth. So something you'll see more of listed out are the trainings that staff, myself, managers, or others are participating on, just to give the board some insights into the recognition that I have, and I think we have, is growth is important, and we want to really help everybody here learn new things, new skills, and challenge themselves in different ways.
Any questions, Travis? I guess for next month, on page 40 of the packet, laid out things that we're going to probably talk about. One thing that's not on there, of course, I guess, is the report. We'll add that as well as the resolution, I guess, on corrective actions. But, so I think July will be another full meeting, a lot of stuff to cover. And
Are we going to go back over some of the information on the SEPs in July as well?
yeah, let's try to do that if we have to do the agenda.
And Chair Howard, members of the board, and a proposed topic that I think might be worthwhile for a July discussion, similar to the life of the permit cycle that we gave, which is really just more of an informational presentation. This would be focused a bit more on ozone. I heard from Matt Keating some questions about Portland and Medford's vehicle inspection program and some wonderings essentially of why does Lane County not have something that exists in Portland, and in Medford. And so I think that could be an interesting topic to talk about ozone and explore what the national ambient air quality standards for ozone are, how we stand in comparison to them, and how that delta of where we're at versus where the federal government wants us to be can be a motivator or otherwise for something like a vehicle inspection program.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to thank Matt and Travis for sending Matt out to the Oak Ridge Wildfire Prevention Expo. And that was yesterday. And so Matt got to meet Sasquatch and Smokey up in person.
Starstruck.
So, yeah. But thanks for sending them out there and supporting Oak Ridge here.
Yeah, happy meeting.
You didn't have to wear the costume.
Not tall enough.
Exactly. I think Brian's probably wearing that costume, eh, Mayor?
No, we got a kind citizen that runs our disc golf course that is tall enough, and he's actually got the mannerisms and the motions down. He's pretty good at it. Don't you agree, Matt?
Professional.
Yes.
Okay, well, is there anything else, anybody, for the good of the order? Is that two? So, I guess we'll adjourn. Thanks everybody for attending.
Thank you.
Good work. Good meeting.
Good news is there won't be a lot more to discuss about the audit.
Assuming it's down.
What's our next meeting?
Well, talking about fire season, my watch duty's already gone up.
Oh, I know.
We have staff.
We have watch duty on your,
Yeah.
What is watching?
I